Hey everyone, I'm Mike Del Preti, and you're listening to Context, where I'm having meaningful conversations with industry leaders about the businesses and technologies changing real estate. So, my job is turning data and context into meaning, and that's what I'm continuing to do by talking to my guest today, Hari Krishnan, the CEO of PropertyGuru from Singapore. Hello.
Hey, Mike.
I appreciate you coming all the way from Singapore to Boulder just to be on this podcast.
Just for you, Mike. It's great to be here.
That's awesome. So, I'll ask you the question I ask everybody. How do you typically start your day?
I start my day with I have some sort of embodiment ritual. There are certain words I say. I can't unfortunately share all of it, but it's essentially manifesting a version of myself for the day and for the future and sort of getting myself in the right mindset. I got two kids. They're middle school and high school, so I don't have to get them ready per se, but I do enjoy getting them up, getting them going. I've been doing it for the last 15, 16 years. I enjoy doing that. And then I get in a good stretch as well, like a physical stretch.
Yeah.
And then depending on the schedule, I either get in some exercise or not. In the morning, I definitely get exercise during the day. The morning is not always possible.
Okay, that's great. So you're the CEO of PropertyGuru, and you've been there for how long now?
This is my ninth year.
Ninth year. Okay. Well, we'll get to PropertyGuru in a second, but you mentioned kids, and I like thinking about this. How do you explain what you do to your kids?
The way I explained it, I said I help people find their homes. So when someone's looking to get their home, we are the people who make that happen. So it's not just discovery. We'll get to it in a second, but obviously in our part of the world, it's everything from understanding what people can afford, understanding what real estate's about, et cetera, et cetera. But really, we're about getting people into their homes.
And then the follow-up to that is, well, what do you do? What's your job as CEO?
My job is kind of like the producer of a film, not even the director. I've got to create the context. I got to create the guardrails. I got to create the budget, create the rules of operations, set the vision and direction for the company, and then get out of the way of my team. That's my job.
Okay, great. All right, so for those that are not familiar with PropertyGuru, why don't you give us a little overview of what that is?
Sure. So PropertyGuru, were originally a Singaporean startup, started in 2007 in a pre-iPhone era, as I like to say. And today we run marketplaces in 4 markets in Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand. But we've diversified and we've got B2B offerings. We got an enterprise product that we sell to urban planners and regulators and valuers, et cetera. And then we got financing operations as well. And we serve about 40 million people every month across our Southeast Asian region.
Right. And so for the US-based listeners, I mean, effectively PropertyGuru is the Zillow, the leading real estate portal of Singapore and Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia.
That's correct. So the brand varies a little bit, but in Singapore, it's called PropertyGuru. In Malaysia, we've got a different name. In Vietnam, a different name, et cetera. But yeah, absolutely. We're very similar to Zillow. And I'd say particularly in markets like Singapore and Malaysia and Vietnam, it is a household name. So,
well, similar to Zillow in terms of brand and in terms of attracting an audience, but dissimilar in terms of the revenue model. How do you make money?
So we have a variety of offerings. I think at the core, we sell annual subscriptions to agents. Agents buy access to our marketplace and the ability to then market their products. And then we also have offerings for real estate developers, which we monetize through advertising solutions. We have offline products as well, events and awards. We run the largest property awards business. You got to keep in mind, in Southeast Asia, there's a lot of real estate that's coming off the plan. So those cities are being built as we speak. So the offerings for real estate developers are as important, if not more important, than the offerings we have for agents. And agents, in many cases, are representing new projects themselves. So solutions for new projects, helping people discover stuff that's coming off the plan, is a big part of our technology and our overall solution.
Okay. All right. So these emerging markets, right? Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia. I mean, they're basically just like the US, but 10 or 15 years behind, right? Everybody's on the same curve, the same plan, and we're just catching up.
Well, in some ways, yes, and in other ways, absolutely not. I think one thing which you and I were talking about a little earlier is, if you look at something like Vietnam, okay, Vietnam's a great example of a city, a country rather. It's about 100 million people. It's a lot larger than most people realize. And if you look at Ho Chi Minh City in South Vietnam, it has the metropolitan area is about 9 million people. The greater metropolitan, the broader area is 20 million odd, so it's very large. But that increases by about 100 to 200,000 people every year. So urbanization is happening at pace. It's a very, very young population. The median age is in the 20s. The middle class is emerging as we speak. So the one big distinction to, let's say, the US is if you think about the middle class and urbanization, a lot of this happened the early 20th century, early to mid 20th century, let's call it. The digital revolution happened maybe 30 years ago. And then all the solutions, Zillow and their competitors are building solutions in that context. In Vietnam, those things are happening concurrently. Urbanization, emergence in the middle class, digitization are happening in parallel. So people are moving as middle class citizens to Ho Chi Minh City. They're looking for housing and they're looking for digital solutions because they're digital natives. They're sort of growing up with smartphones in their hands.
At 40,000 feet, if I was looking at these businesses in the different countries, I'd say they look pretty fundamentally the same. Like there's so many similarities in that. I mean, when you think about it, do you see a lot of similarities or do you see more dissimilarities?
If you talk at the highest level of purpose, we may use different words as companies around the world. But like I described it to my kids, we're in the business of putting people into homes. Now, in some cases, people are investors. In some cases, they're sellers. They're not looking to buy. In some cases, they're renters. Yeah, now we're getting really nuanced. But essentially, we're still helping people get into homes. It's just understanding the context of the countries within which we operate and modifying the business model to optimize for the local solution. I think real estate is, in my experience, or my knowledge rather, the only place where there are no global majors. People operate only in their context. The biggest company in America is not there in Canada.
Why? Why is that?
Hyper-local real estate.
But your company is in 4 different
That's right.
geographies.
Yep. So I think you have a couple of instances in continental Europe, some smaller companies in the Middle East, etc.
Yeah.
But I think it's hard to do. It's very hard to do.
Why?
Because the context is so different. It just varies. Even if you look at our countries, geographically they border each other, but they are at different stages of development. They have different languages, different even political systems. We have a communist country, we have democracies, we have all these different systems that are happening. Very developed Singapore, very high GDP per capita, and complete emerging market like Vietnam or Thailand. And so the real estate needs are different.
Yeah.
The biases are different. You have an aging population in Thailand, a very young population in Vietnam, things like that.
Do you have any benefits from being in multiple different markets?
We believe so. Because I think there are two dimensions. A technology company, for me, there are 2 things that are important in a technology company, and we define ourselves as a tech company. It is access to talent and the benefits of the technology. So when you think about access to talent, the fact that we have a brand in 4 different markets allows us to hire people in different markets. We have engineers in 3 out of those 4 markets. We are able to also use a singular platform. So if you think about it as a back end and a front end, the back end we are able to standardize, and the front end we try and customize. So the sales and marketing people, as well as the sales and marketing solutions, etc., are optimized. So let me simplify that. We use Google Maps, for example, as our mapping technology. It's the same thing across all our countries. But in Singapore, we split the city up in districts. That's how we define that city. Bangkok defines itself by proximity to the BTS, which is basically the metro rail, the commuter rail thing. So we have the same technology at the back end, Google Maps, but the way it's manifested is very different. Cut up by districts in Singapore, mapped against the BTS line in Bangkok. And I think that's understanding the local nuance and being able to bring that technology and essentially amortize it across multiple markets.
Okay. And you said you have engineering teams in 3 countries.
That's right.
Could you do this with an engineering team just based in Singapore?
You could, but Singapore is the most expensive cost base. The cost of an engineer in Singapore is about the same as in California.
Yeah.
So that is not great. You have very good young engineers in Vietnam, good engineers in Malaysia. And we have a big engineering center now in India as well. But that's pure engineering. We don't have actually commercial operations in India.
Okay.
But I think the ability to tap into talent in multiple locations is actually table stakes for a technology business now. If you are going to be stuck with one location, you're going to be stuck with a particular cost base. And that does limit your growth opportunity in the medium to long term.
Yeah, super interesting. All right. How do you think about building trust and transparency in these markets?
If you think about these markets, again, I think one of the interesting things to contrast it from the US, there are no MLSs. Listings are created on our platform. So it is IP. It is our IP. The second thing is, well, there are 2 or 3 things. So one other thing is we have tens of thousands of agents. Each one of them is essentially a sole proprietor. So we don't deal with agencies. So though they carry agency licenses, they're not paid or salaried employees of these agencies. And therefore, each one of them vote with their own wallets. And this means it's completely fragmented. Obviously, from our perspective, that's fantastic because it's a massive barrier to entry. You have to go and convince each man and woman out there that they should not work with PropertyGuru and go to another company. So that's fantastic. The other thing I'd say is data. Real estate data is simply not there. There is no equivalent to the large real estate data businesses that exist, for example, in the US. There is no equivalent. So you have a multi-billion-dollar real estate industry that does not have data products to build it. And that we've seen as an opportunity, which we're about 2 or 3 years into trying to build out solutions there. But again, trying to figure out what are the right solutions for these markets. What do they need in a world which is affected by climate change, which has got all these other issues, demographic changes, etc. What are the data sets that actually make sense? So it's not about cutting and pasting over what works in the US or the UK or Australia or whatever. It's understanding what is necessary for Malaysia and solving for that market uniquely.
What's an example? What's a data set that matters for Singapore and a data set that matters for Vietnam?
So let's say in Singapore, we have a core product. It's called DataSense. So we're just launched a new product, a new module in it called Mall Intelligence. It's called the Mall Intelligence module. It's meant for mall operators, so REITs, as well as retailers who are within malls. Those people want to understand what are the demographics of the people who actually show up at these malls. We have proprietary first-party data, but we've also tied up with a couple of exclusives, one of the large credit card companies. We got sort of affordability information, and we got mobility data from a third player. And we're not in the data business, we're in the insights business. We bring this together, and essentially we can tell you in your mall, where do these people come from? Are they from within Singapore? Are they foreigners? If they're foreigners, where do they come from? And then what is their affordability? We're able to overlap. If they're from within Singapore, what's their affordability? So it gives you a sense of dwell time, footfalls, etc. And so you can get the right kind of retail mix, for example. If you're a retailer, you can decide, is this mall the right one or is the other mall the right one? And so now you have these kind of customers working with us.
Yeah.
If you look at Malaysia, for example, I'll give you a great example. We built out a product which essentially is a risk API. Now, in Malaysia, as is around the world, Malaysia is affected by floods, which happen once or twice a year, greatly affects the valuation of land, as you might imagine, particularly farmland. And so when the urban planners and the central bank over there are thinking about how to value that land and make those land tranches available for sale, they lacked a solution. But we were able to actually build a product which correlates valuation of land with floodplains, essentially. You might think it's very simple. Actually, when the data is not there, you got to first collect the data, then organize it, standardize it, and then productize it. And we did all of that, made it into an API, and essentially the central bank there is now paying customer trying to understand, okay, how do they do what's right for Malaysians?
Yeah.
It's a completely different solution than what's needed in Singapore.
Okay, I appreciate you sharing that. In Southeast Asia, would you say the real estate space is changing fast or changing slow?
Real estate is a patient industry, I think, the world over, right? Things are planned in decades. As a technologist myself, when I came in here 9 years ago, there were elements which would frustrate me, the lack of speed. But I think experience has taught me there's a reason for it. It's the largest asset class in the world. There are big consequences to getting things wrong, unlike, let's say, in entertainment or travel, where you don't want to get it wrong, but you often get a chance to make it up to the person. In a place where the middle class is emerging, in many cases, it's the first generation that's going to be able to afford to buy a home. The consequences of getting it wrong are pretty immense. So getting the data sets, the technology, the solutions right significantly reduces the intimidation factor in the largest asset class that exists. And so I would say demand is moving at speed. Transactions, it kind of varies. So right now, for example, we've gone from if I talk about Singapore, it's gone in 3 years from a place which had 1% interest rate to something that's about 4 or 5. That completely changes the economics for real estate developers, completely changes the economics for property seekers. And so people are going to pause. They're going to take longer on the transaction. But fundamentally, if you believe Singapore is a good place for you to have capital appreciation or rental yield or whatever your logic is, and by the way, in our markets, you have a lot of capital appreciation. It's a massive wealth creator, real estate. For generations, people have found real estate to be a fantastic wealth creator, better than even the equity markets. And so you are still seeing demand, but you are seeing them, if you just look at 2024, a slight slowdown in transactions because people are pausing. When you have 2 wars, and you have high interest rate, cost of living, et cetera, supply chains broken, there are going to be consequences to a sector like real estate.
There's a lot going on in real estate globally.
Mm-hmm.
Billions and billions of dollars of venture capital, new models, disruptors, all the stuff going on. For you and your job, how important is it for you to stay informed in terms of what's going on in, say, the US, Europe, Australia? And how do you stay informed?
I listen to your podcast. No, that's definitely, no, jokes aside, it really is useful. I think the reality, I mentioned that earlier, I think what's unique in our space is because we're so hyper local, there is the ability to actually sit with some of my peers. I've had the opportunity with peers in Australia, in Europe, in the Middle East in particular, many years ago, even with people in the US, to understand what do they see as opportunities. Why are you able to create models like iBuyer or a Power Buyer? You begin to understand what are the conditions. It's not just about a business opportunity, but how does it actually serve a customer, a customer segment? Is that a solution looking for a problem, or is it a genuine problem you're solving? And in many cases, at least for the successful businesses, obviously they're solving a real problem. And you try and take inspiration. But for me, I define myself as a technologist more than a real estate person. And therefore, I'm always looking at the big tech trends. So when I look at things, you and I were talking about this earlier today over a coffee, generative AI, this is, if not handled well, is an existential threat for all contemporary consumer internet technologies, including the real estate sector.
How so? Say more.
The discovery process, if you think about it, a lot of the consumer internet in its current manifestation is really about discovery. And companies like Google, et cetera, have trained us on this, and they've done a masterful job of doing that. But if you look at Google, Amazon, name your company, and not just in the US, even in China and other parts of the world, it's all about discovery. And the discovery experience, even in this sort of infancy stage, when you're dealing with any form of generative AI, whether it's ChatGPT or other tech that's out there, it's remarkable. The conversational aspect, the fact that you can forget about Boolean search. You don't have to do things that you had to do 15 years ago. Those things become obsolete. You can just have a normal conversation like Mike and Hari are having right now and solve a problem and that's today. Then you start thinking about the way generative AI is influencing content and content creation, content discovery. What's that going to do for the real estate sector? It's going to challenge every single business model that we have out there.
Are there any particular applications of AI in real estate that you think are promising?
Well, we've sort of jumped in with both feet. Because the only way to deal with existential threats is to lean into it. You have to lean into it. We've been using it for a few years. I think one thing that frustrated me, to be honest, was everyone immediately went to all the efficiency gains rather than trying to solve new problems. So we need fewer engineers. We can use GitHub Copilot and but how about you solving real problems? So I'll give you an example of a real problem we're solving right now. We use generative AI we've made it available for real estate agents when they do listing creations. And so when it comes to the content descriptor, the free field text, we give them the option to actually use generative AI to actually create the content there. 90% of our agents have used it. 75% of them are repeat users. It's a huge productivity gain for them, but it's a better experience for the consumer too, because they're able to get the generative AI often is much more descriptive. It takes out the randomness. Very often it comes down to the personality of the individual agent. And this is not an entertainment field. So we don't want that much randomness. It's meant to be somewhat repeatable. And so I think generative AI has been very useful there. Another one we're doing is with our enterprise product, we have DataSense. I often say everyone who uses DataSense is not going to be the equivalent of someone sitting behind a Bloomberg monitor. You shouldn't have to be an analyst who, you can do all your fancy things, all the filters within it, and you can do all kind of great insights, and that's fantastic. But what if I'm an average executive, or if I'm a senior executive? I neither have the time nor the interest to go and try and figure out this tech. But if I could overlay just a layer of that generative AI, I'm able to extract all that beautiful insight, create graphs, whatever, things that help me understand what is happening in that world. If I got to contrast two completely different districts of Kuala Lumpur, let's say in Malaysia, I'm able to just go in and say, how does Bangsar compare with Mount Kiara? And that's English. And it'll go and pull out everything else and stick it out there. And by the way, this can apply, I said English, but actually it's powerful because it can actually now it's becoming applicable in other languages as well. And I think that's going to become very, very powerful. So I think generative AI's ability to simplify flows of information is what I call both a fantastic opportunity and an existential threat for those who don't lean into it.
All right. So what does jumping in with both feet to an existential crisis look like from a resource allocation standpoint? Back to your original point, your job is allocating resources, setting up guardrails. How are you doing that?
So I think there are multiple layers to this. I think one is sort of making sure that a couple of years ago, we started the conversation at the board level, at the team level, at all levels, we were having this conversation saying, hey, this is coming, it's real. It is not just something that's going to happen adjacent to us. It's going to sort of wash over everything. And it's very important that we lean into this. First is sort of just starting the conversation. Then you sort of get the early adopters. And inevitably in these kind of situations, it's your engineering team, your product teams, getting them behind the steering wheel, getting them the ability to drive. So, for example, GitHub Copilot, improving code quality, et cetera, engineering efficiency. Yeah, we've been doing that for years. 90% of the engineers who use GitHub Copilot within PropertyGuru, massive advocates for it. So now when we hire a new engineer, they are immediately onboarded into using that. That's part of their experience of coding at PropertyGuru. But then it's not just, I think the power of generative AI is it's not just for the engineers. So we are already piloting, we work with the Microsoft stack for our internal communication, but we're working with, I think I was just chatting with you earlier, we are working with copilots within teams, within Office, et cetera, to try and get executives to understand how to use this better. I was talking about the fact that I was on a long flight from Singapore to Boulder, and I missed a couple of meetings, obviously, while I was on the plane. My ability to go into that Copilot and say, hey, synthesize what happened in that meeting I missed, and actually also analyze the tone of voice by looking at the video transcript of that meeting. It was a live Teams call. And then I sort of verified that with my chief of staff, and it turns out it was spot on. I think that, and again, it's very, very early days, and I'm talking about one particular use case, but I can see a lot of other use cases. I've seen examples of you can write a Word document and convert that into a PowerPoint by just knowing the right prompt. That tech is there right now. And the same is, I'm just using Microsoft as an example, but it doesn't really matter. Google's got its own thing. Everyone's got their own thing. Salesforce has got their own thing, et cetera. Your ability to get everyone comfortable with it, not just the engineers, is important. So our board is having that conversation. The chair of our audit and risk committee, she leans into it. So everyone is interested in how do you become a better version of whatever role you're in.
Maybe you could have some sort of AI overlord acting as your board.
That's a thought. That's a thought.
But I mean, kind of famously, and I'm thinking of resource allocation, right? You have this, Google had this 80-20 rule back in the day, right? Where engineers spend 20% of their time on whatever they want. You had this idea of mobile first. Everything we do at our company is we're going to start with mobile. When the rubber hits the road, like what are you doing, if anything, to encourage that kind of activity?
I think it's in every conversation. The critical thing, we don't go, it's not the 20% time like Google. I mean, it worked for them for a while, and I think there's now some
like
data out there.
10 or 15 years ago at this point.
Exactly.
So.
And then at some point it stopped working, and it worked for their company, good for them. I think for us, it's much more, everyone has to use it. So it's in every conversation, it's in every meeting. We discuss it, we discuss the fact that, we talk about it anecdotally during meetings, staff meetings, town halls, board meetings. We actually show the work product, the result of it. We showcase it. As I said, some of these things are now out in the wild. Our customers are using it, and we talk about it with our customers. So it's not, our external stakeholders are seeing it too. On our earnings calls, we're a publicly listed business. When I'm talking to our investors, our analysts, we're talking to them as well. So every stakeholder, investors, board members, employees, we're talking to all of them. And by the way, I'm talking about at home as well. I'm talking to my kids about it. And, seeing how they are being raised, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, are true digital natives. We think we're pretty good, you and me, but this is a different level.
Yeah.
It's the sort of mind boggles when you start thinking about how they will use generative AI.
Yeah. All right. So if you think about the past 12 months, it's been kind of a busy, active 12 months, a lot going on. What's one of the biggest challenges you've faced?
That's a great question. I think for me, it's a time of a lot of stress for a lot of people, right? I mean, real stress in certain parts of the world, physical stress, safety issues, or economic issues, etc. Climate change. In a lot of places, I'd say the US is perhaps acutely so, but in many other places as well, society is divided, and it creates a lot of stress and a lot of mental anguish for people. I think for me personally, it is, as a son, as a husband, as a father, as a leader, how do I stay calm? How do I be useful to the people I care about, the people I work with, the people I interact with. I think that's been challenging. And it takes, you asked me that question at the beginning, how do I start my morning? Why do I do all of that is because I keep working on myself and I've worked with coaches and such, but what I'm trying to work on is I've worked in a particular way. I'm now in my late 40s. I worked in a particular way through my 20s and 30s, and it made me successful in some ways, but it also had some side effects. How do I work for my next 25, 30 years of my career? I don't intend to retire anytime soon. So my point is, I don't know if I'll have a job like this 30 years from now, but if I'm going to be working and productive, I know I have to find another gear. And if the world's going to be some version of this stress, I'm going to have to find a way to calm myself down, be centered, and be able to make good decisions. I think it's a much more, we've been talking a lot about tech on this call, but I think it's actually tapping into the human emotions has been the biggest challenge, and I think the biggest opportunity for me personally over the last 12 months and over the next 12 as well.
Yeah. When you talk about human emotions, that reminds me of what we were talking about when we were walking over here, this idea of energy in the different markets. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think, I love going to Vietnam. Vietnam's a young population. It's hopeful. It's optimistic. The language there, they are coming into their prime time as far as they're concerned, right? And so there's this, even with all the frustrations that might exist in a country that's trying to emerge, if you approach it with hope and optimism, you have a better than 50% chance of actually being successful, right?
Yeah.
Made up stat there, but sounds about right. But I think put the other way around, in many parts of the world, there's a lot of negativity. I think human beings, we don't do well anywhere. We don't make good decisions when we're stressed and we're negative, we're angry. And I think when I look at Vietnam, to some degree, we don't do business in India, but I see the same energy in India as well. A lot of hope, a lot of optimism. It's great fun to build businesses in countries like that.
Yeah. Are you having fun in Vietnam?
Very much so. Very much so. I think Vietnam it's got a sawtooth growth curve. It'll go way up, and then there'll be something dramatic that'll happen. It's a single party government, so it'll dramatically they'll run a policy which will shut everything down for a while. It happened last year in our sector. But now you see the way it's starting off this year again, nice and strong, much more robust. They've fixed a lot of things. They've looked at, what's the right way to take care of citizens' interests as well as business interests and make it commercially viable, but in the long term, not just in the short term. So a few people get rich and everyone else gets screwed. But how do we do this in a way so that we learn the good lessons and build the right infrastructure? So it's fun. It can be frustrating at times, and it requires a certain kind of DNA to build in Asia. But I love it. I wouldn't want to build a business anywhere else.
That's great. That's great to hear. So we're up on time. Any closing thoughts?
No, I think the one thing I'd say, listen, I love being in Boulder. Thank you for having me here.
Of course. Just send me your invoice for the flight.
100%, man. It's a small invoice. But I think the one reminder is it's always useful to step out of your context. For me personally, stepping out of my context, being here, learning from the businesses here, not just the real estate businesses, but the businesses in Boulder, in Colorado, in the US, to take inspiration back home is fantastic. But I definitely encourage all your other listeners, and many of them who are in the US, to think about that too. There are other parts of the world which are doing some interesting things where the reality is very different. Society isn't as fractured or isn't as negative in certain parts of the world. And that is both cause for optimism within your own country, but also inspiration for you as a business leader if you are looking for opportunities in other parts of the world.
Yeah, the power of connections. I mean, we were just talking about our mutual friend, Court Cunningham, who was on last week, CEO of Orchard. I mean, you've chatted with him, and that's incredible. And through those connections, not just listening, but reaching out and talking. I know Court is a big fan of that and building those networks and the connections, meaningful connections with people. A lot of power out of that.
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
All right. Well, Hari, thank you for joining. I'm Mike Del Prete. You've been listening to Context. If you want to see more of my work where I'm turning data and context into meaning, that's actionable intelligence that's clear, timely, and helps inform real estate industry leaders, check out my website, mikedp.com. We'll catch you next time. Thanks.